Alright, so this is going to be part 2 to what if Tanjiro was in Black Clover. So with that being said, let's just roll the intro.
Bow in the presence of greatness. 'Cause right now that has forsaken us. You should be honored by my lateness. That I would even show up to this fake shit. So go ahead, go nuts, go.
Alright, so in the last part we just got done with Asta getting to the Black Bulls and Tanjiro meeting up with Yami and then learning all about magic in the short period of time that they had during the kind of training months that Asta had. During this time, Tanjiro would have to study a little bit of the language, both written and spoken, because remember, he's speaking Japanese while the others are speaking their native language, which isn't Japanese, because if you remember, Yami had to do the same. So at this point, he has a basic understanding of both the spoken and written language. So with that being said, let's actually start off where we left off, with Asta getting to the Black Bulls hideout. This is where he would meet the entire, group. Well, not all of them, but most of them. Here he would meet Magna, Finral, of course the captain, Yami, and the rest of the group there. After the introductions would be said, this is where Yami would say, "Aren't we missing someone?" And coming back from a recent mission, this is where Tanjiro would come in. Now everyone would be ecstatic for him to come back because of one reason. During those months, Tanjiro was actually able to become the second vice captain to the Black Bulls. Now I'm saying the second as there already is a vice captain, that being Noct, I believe that's how you say his name. But if you didn't know, a squad can have more than one captain. We see this with Julian's old squad, in where Yami, William were actually both vice captains at the same time. So it is possible. And if you remember from the last part, I said that Tanjiro was able to up their rankings just a bit, from going from negative 30 stars to negative 12, given that he gets 17 stars during that time. Now that seems like a lot, but understand that Tanjiro at this point is pretty powerful. Now, Asta's first impressions of Tanjiro is kind of off-putting for him quite a bit, and the reason for that is because of how Tanjiro looks. Now I didn't explain this in the first part because I really wanted to show it in this particular part, how Tanjiro looks, and for those who don't know, you need to read the manga to understand, but I'm going to be explaining it, so if you haven't read the manga, I do suggest doing so. I'm talking about Demon Slayer, and yeah. So Tanjiro has both a non-functional arm, and he's also blind in one eye. So starting off with his left arm, it's aged, so it's like the arm of an old man, but he can't really do much with it. He can't grip anything, but he can move his arm normally. It's just that he can't grip anything. Also, it's aged. And with his left eye, it's obviously blind. So when Asta sees this, he sees a kind of battle-hardened warrior in front of him. He feels the experience that he has. It's almost intimidating to see Tanjiro, but at the same time, there's also this gentle side to Tanjiro when he gives the smile towards everyone. And Asta doesn't really know how to describe it. It's confusing to him. So Tanjiro would make the first move and go up to Asta, extending his right arm for a handshake. Asta then does so, and he's very giddy. He's eager to meet someone like this, someone strong, and Tanjiro says something to him. So Tanjiro says, "You are new recruit?" And Asta's a little bit confused, and he says, "Oh yeah, I'm the rookie." Tanjiro then continues his introduction, and he says, "My name is Tanjiro, what's yours?" Again, Asta being ecstatic, he would yell out his name, that being Asta. Yami would then grab Asta, saying that he's too loud, and to show him a little bit of respect, saying that the person he just shook hands with was the second vice captain to the Black Bulls. And this is where Asta would try to apologize profusely, and Tanjiro would just smile back at him. Yami then says, "Oh yeah, he's not really good at expressing himself, given that he's a foreigner and doesn't really know the language all too well." Then Yami says, "Anyways, let's get on with your baptism." And Asta says, "Baptism? What do you mean?" Then Magna says, "A baptism by fire. If you want to join the Black Bulls, We gotta know that you're ready and you're tough enough to join. Asta would be super excited to hear this, and he would do exactly what Magna would tell him to do. And obviously the physical parts would be very easy since Asta's very, very strong. So nothing would really change at this time. So let's skip all the way to the next day after Asta had did the chores for the Black Bulls and he meets up with Noel. But a quick rundown of what happened during the baptism is that Asta obviously passes because of the same way that he does in the anime, that being able to redirect Magna's attack. So going back on track, Asta would meet up with Noel, with Magna being there after showing him around the place. This is where they would have that altercation between each other, discussing the difference in powers between royals and commoners like Asta and Magna. It would get a little bit heated as Noel would try to shoot at Magna, but something different happens this time. Because Tanjiro is more at the base than Noct, he actually sees what's happening and he decides to, well, destroy the attack. He uses the 11th form of the Breath of the Water, that being Dead Calm. Now he learned this during the 2 years that I was talking about beforehand at the beginning of the series from Giyu. So as you know, that's Giyu's personal creation and isn't part of the normal set of forms. So to everyone else, this is what happens. As she tries to shoot the projectile, it just disappears mid-air and Tanjiro walks forward and he says teammates shouldn't fight, and he tries to get in between the two. As Noel looks at Tanjiro, she's kind of taken aback by his appearance and then storms off. Asta would be super amazed at what just happened and he would ask Tanjiro what he just did, what spell was that, and what type of magic does he have, as he sees that he uses a sword all the time. And he tells Asta that that necessarily wasn't really magic. Instead, it was a technique that he learned a while back. He tells Asta that he puts a little bit of his magic in it, while the technique itself is the majority of the force, because obviously he doesn't want to hurt anyone there, so it wouldn't make sense for him to use a lot of magic at this point. This is where Tanjiro actually shows Asta his grimoire, and it's a 4-leaf. Asta is super amazed at just seeing this, and Magna recalls the day that Tanjiro joined. He saw a lot of potential within him, and it kind of made him jealous, as he was a foreigner with this incredible magic, and him being a peasant not given the same power, being born different. Now this also came to a climax as Yami was choosing the next vice captain, that being Tanjiro. Magna didn't approve of this, that being because Tanjiro was only in the squad for so little bit of time, although he did rack the most golden stars. So what happened is Yami decides to settle it with a fight. He wanted Magna to fight Tanjiro, and in this fight Tanjiro does end up winning, but Tanjiro isn't cocky and he actually does help out Magna off the ground after he beats him, and this is where their kind of respect for each other comes into play, as Magna misjudged Tanjiro. In this kind of flashback, Yami would tell Magna that Tanjiro wasn't born with this type of power, he had to earn it, as you could obviously tell. He's fought his battles and gained his strength, and you could do the same, Magna. Asta then quickly interrupts this flashback to ask Tanjiro if he could teach him what he just did, because if it's mostly technique, maybe he can also do it. He brings out his sword and he begs Tanjiro to, well, teach him. Tanjiro grabs his sword and he feels the magic being zapped away from him, so he quickly puts it down. So a lot of you might be asking, well, how can Tanjiro actually do this? I mean, isn't he like weak compared to the Black Clover universe? Well, we know during the final selection, he was actually able to break Genyu's arm, and the force it takes to break an arm like that would be in the range of 700 to 900 pounds, that being grip strength alone. And obviously when you have a high grip strength like that, you'll be able to lift heavier things. And from what I've seen online, a lot of people estimate Asta's sword to be around 200 pounds. So this would be plausible, although I don't know the ratio between grip strength and lifting strength, if that makes sense. Asta would be kind of amazed that he can lift something like that, but Tanjiro already kind of knows that the sword that Asta has is anti-magic, given the baptism and all that. Also, the fact that there's no magic coming off of him is a dead giveaway. He just wanted to see how heavy it was, given how big it was and how much Asta had to swing it during the baptism. Now Tanjiro says to Asta, sword is too big, you need smaller one like this, and he would show 2 swords at his side. Now the reason why he has 2 swords is, one is the sword that he had made for him at the blacksmiths in the Black Clover universe, and the other is a sword that he has during the end of the manga. The same one that has Renkoku's hilt on it. I believe that's the terminology. And the reason why he had the other one made is because he doesn't really want to damage the other one in case he needs it for a big fight, because if you remember, Tanjiro has broken many swords in the past, and there isn't any special kind of steel like there is in the Demon Slayer universe. So he's only going to take it out when he's serious. Then this is where Asta would beg, saying, come on please, can you at least teach me something? And obviously Tanjiro would be like, well, I don't know, the sword's too big. And as you know, they're just talking, he can't help but to shake that feeling of wanting to help Noelle in some way, as she's clearly troubled, and he could see that. So we could skip to the next day, and Tanjiro would be out in the morning training as he usually does, refining his skills even more, because at this point he's never really stopped training since the end of the manga in this particular story that I'm doing. And that is because the other styles that are out there, not only that, but he is someone who wants to better himself as he is a swordsman. Not only that, but he may need it in the future if a threat emerges again, something like Muzan. That being said, it's not like he was training super hard during those 2 years, but instead training rather lightly, if that makes sense. Now ever since he's gotten into the Black Bulls, he's been training a lot more hard, as he needs to keep up with the others. Not only that, but he needs to get stronger for his squad and eventually find his friends and family. As he's training in the woods, he hears some blasts in the distance. He then smells something in the air. He knows that it's Noelle, so he goes to investigate. Instead of being like Austin where he looks from afar, he rather steps into her view to tell her something. Seeing this, Noelle is freaking out, thinking that he's gonna laugh at her, and what happens is he just smiles and he says to her, I will help you with your magic. And she says, what do you mean? How could you help me with my magic? He says to her that she needs to know control and that he will teach her. He then gives her one of his katanas and says, follow what I do. Noelle then says, how can someone like you teach me anything about magic? And she puts a lot of emphasis on you. And this is where Tanjiro puts down his sword and then takes out his grimoire, showing that it has 4 leaves. Obviously at this point Tanjiro knows that a 4-leaf is very important in their culture. It means that you are very powerful. After this, Tanjiro starts to train with Noelle, as he does the constant slashing like he does at the beginning of the series with his own master. He tells Noelle to focus her breathing and to keep it steady, as that's the first step into control. After a bit, Noelle just feels like giving up. She doesn't see the purpose in this. She doesn't see any results. And Tanjiro stops her. She says, it's slow, but it will work. You and me were the same. And she says, what do you mean? I'm a royal. Don't disrespect me like that. And Tanjiro says, sorry, we both had no talent. So Tanjiro tells Noelle his story with a little bit lost in translation. He tells her at the age of 13, his entire family had died, only leaving his sister. But as fate might have it, she was turned into a demon. And it's only the kindness of Gyu that he was able to learn the sword through his master. He tells her that it took 2 years at the age of 13 for him to learn the basics and to find a way to cure his sister. Then it took 2 more years for him to succeed. And he tells her that the moral is that you could take someone unremarkable like himself, and just by a little bit of discipline and training, you can become someone greater than yourself. After this, Tanjiro shows what she will be able to do in the future. He does the 10th form of the Breath of the Water, and this is called Constant Flux. Now this is the one in where Tanjiro spins, and as he collects momentum, the blade basically becomes a dragon. Now this is what Tanjiro does, and he shows him basically chopping down multiple trees with this. Now he put a little bit of magic in this so it becomes a little bit more visual, and he shows her that with this little bit amount of magic, you could do a devastating amount of force. Noel starts to understand it a bit. He's using the sword almost like a wand. He's channeling his magic through the sword, as little as it may be. With this, she's convinced to continue training with Tanjiro, as he is the vice captain and he has a 4-leaf grimoire and all the other reasons. So that entire incident that happened in the anime and manga and where she loses control doesn't really happen in this case. Rather, she sticks to the training that Tanjiro does with her. With this, she's able to learn more magic control and doesn't really form the same connections that she does in canon with the rest of the Black Bulls, but she does trust Tanjiro very much so. So we could skip a few days, and this is the time in where Magna and Yami go to the capital or around that area so they could gamble their wages. Now, normally it would just be those two, but I think because how Yami is close to Tanjiro, he would bring him along to show him how it works. Now, I don't think Tanjiro would gamble because I don't see it in his personality to do so, especially with so much money on the line. So I think he would just be there as their ride, just in case something were to happen. So that's what happens. The same thing would occur just how it does in canon, because they're still gambling and they still would have lost. So because that happens, Yami is indebted to the chief of Saucy Village and therefore has to do one request, which is obviously the boar hunting. Because of this, Magna and Tanjiro would have to, well, help out, obviously with Yami forcing the two to do it, which this would also make a great opportunity to get their rookies into the field. Now, because of that, both Asta and Noel will have to go with them. Because there's 2 people going this time with the ability to ride brooms, Magna won't have to be as tired as he was beforehand, so he'll have a good chance to help out during the fight. Now, the way that it would work here is that I think Asta would be very impressed with Crazy Cyclone, and because of that he would decide to ride with Magna, given that Noel would have to go with Tanjiro. Now, the ride there would be quite interesting, as Noel would be very interested in, well, Tanjiro and his backstory, why he is in the Clover Kingdom to begin with, because remember, he's a foreigner that doesn't really know the language all too much. He has a few months of study on him, but not really that much, if that makes sense. So he would try his best to explain everything, really. He would leave out some parts like the plane crash and things like that, as she wouldn't really understand him or really believe him, as they are technology wise way behind, and it would just make things simpler. So he would explain where he came from and how he became the state that he's in, that being his eye and his arm, that being functional. That being said, I'm going to say another spoiler right now for Demon Slayer. So again, if you haven't seen the manga or the end of the series, I suggest reading it, because this is a somewhat big spoiler, but it's pretty obvious if you've seen the first season. But yeah, so Noel would ask if there's anyone special for him or special to him, and obviously he would say his friends and family, but she would get more specific, like anyone that he is interested romantically, and he would say that he actually does like someone. And I think at this point, because we're talking about like an older generation, I think Tanjiro would have married at a younger age, compared to how it is normally. And because he's 19 at this point, he would have already married. So I think at this point in his relationship, he would be married to Kanao, which is the adopted sister to Shinobu. And yeah, besides that, Tanjiro would also tell her that he's been searching for his friends and family for months now and he hasn't found them yet. And he doesn't know whether or not they're alive or not. But he keeps hope in his heart that they will one day reunite. And with that, they arrive at their destination. Here, they all help out with, well, the boar hunting. And because of that, it's really easy and they get done really fast. So they go to the town faster than in canon. So when they get there, they see the village being raided by the Midnight Sun. So they come to help. With 4 of them being there, it's a lot easier than it was in canon. With Noelle obviously being in the back, as she can't control her magic as well as the others. And because of that, she's just relegated to protecting those behind her, that being the people of the village. So Tanjiro comes up with the plan with Asta and Magna. He tells Asta if he can impress him that he might consider training him in the future. And he says the same to Magna. He tells him to take out the lackeys as he'll take down the one leading them. That is the person with the watch that has ice magic. With the team spread out, he has a conversation with their leader. The leader tells Tanjiro, "So, are you the strongest out of all of them? You're the Black Bull, so I expected no less. Someone like you. How could you even be in the Magic Knights? You're crippled. Look at your arm and your eye. They accept anyone into the Black Bulls, don't they?" Well, I guess it doesn't really matter. You'll be done with in a matter of seconds anyways. This is where he tries to shoot multiple icicles at Tanjiro, but Tanjiro does something special here. He does the 4th form of the Breath of the Flames, that being Blooming Flame Undulation. Now this is a kind of attack that can either be used defensively or offensively. Basically, as the person swings their blade in a kind of circle, this is able to defend any projectiles coming in, or it's able to decapitate multiple people. Now he does this for a number of reasons. First off, because he knows the Breath of the Sun, he has a connection to all the other breath styles. Not only that, but he's actually seen Rengoku do this. And Tanjiro would have remembered this. And there's also a little thing I want to add here. Tanjiro has some really interesting ancestors, and one of them learned the Breath of the Sun, and therefore Tanjiro was able to learn it. Because of this, we know that some genetic skills can be passed down, so to speak. And one of the things that his ancestor had that let him use Breath of the Sun was a photographic memory. Now we obviously know that Tanjiro doesn't really have something to that extent, but we could say that he has some remnants of that ability. Because he remembered Kojiro or Rengoku doing it, he's able to do it himself, if that makes sense. Now obviously this isn't perfect photo memory, but it is a good memory in general. And they do say things like smell is very connected to your memory. So the Ice Mage would be impressed by Tanjiro, saying that he put so little mana into his sword to block it. Now, here's the thing, Tanjiro's able to do these techniques and he puts only a little bit of his magic in it because he doesn't really need all too much, because he's so strong and his techniques are so good that he doesn't really need it all too much. But seeing this, the mage is also underestimating Tanjiro, because Tanjiro isn't, letting out so much mana. He doesn't know the difference in power between the two. So he thinks that Tanjiro is rather weak, but his technique is really good. Tanjiro then asks the man, why is he doing this? He doesn't really know about the Midnight Sun or any reason why a group would just randomly attack this village. It isn't wealthy, so they can't really steal a lot of stuff here, so he wants to know why. The man then looks at Tanjiro, inspecting his body, looking at all over, seeing the battle scars that he's had, and he asks him a question as well. He says, isn't it frustrating to protect the weak? I know you're a magic knight, and I see that you've been in many battles, judging by your appearance now, but why go through all that effort for animals? Simple beings that can't even use that many spells. Tanjiro then says the following, although a little choppy, but I'll just say it normally for the convenience of the story. He says to the man, "I wasn't born strong. I had to work for it since I was 13. And those who are already stronger than me helped me along the way. They were born strong, and they chose to help others. They were born strong to help the weak. So I trained to become strong, to be that person like they were, to help others along their way. And that's what I'm still doing. I'm helping those who can't defend themselves, because that's the right thing to do." The Ice Mage, hearing this, gets a little mad, but doesn't really show it. Then makes a signal to the rest of his group. They all then stop fighting, and then look at the group of civilians there, the town folk, and then they all start to use magic. They create this almost endless sea of shards of ice and mist around it. Meanwhile, as Noelle is just there in the middle of this attack, as the bystanders are just begging her to help, and Tanjiro is too far away to really use any of his breath styles. All she could think is to use her sword that Tanjiro had given to her to help with her magic, and this is where she develops a new spell, that being Sea Dragon's Cradle, I believe, or Sea Dragon's Lair. Anyways, it's the Dome spell. With this, she's able to protect the citizens there. Now she's kind of using the sword almost like a wand as she stabs it into the ground while creating the spell. Tanjiro, after seeing this, is incredibly angry. He's almost seething with rage, but he calmed himself down to clear his mind, and now he's taking the fight seriously. He starts to perform another breath style, that being the Dance of the Fire God, aka the Breath of the Sun. He does the first form called Dance, also known as Waltz, and he actually does use a normal amount of magic within it. So not only is it the normal amount of kind of flames everywhere, but it's also a lot larger and more bright than usual. And this is the first time both Magna, Noelle, and Asta have seen anything like this. Now, as he's going through, closing the distance between him and the Ice Mage has no time to react, so he puts a wall of ice, and that quickly gets sliced. And as Tanjiro's about to hit him, he quickly spins his blade so that he hits the mage with the blunt side of his sword, not giving full impact like it normally would, because obviously he doesn't want to slice his head off. With this, he successfully takes down the leader, and the rest also get caught as well. After this, once they wake up from being knocked out, they would use the magical item to basically commit suicide, with one actually escaping using his water magic. Now, after all the fighting is done, Asta would be incredibly angry for what happened, but Tanjiro would be there to calm him down, as he wants Asta to have a clear mind. After that's done, Tanjiro pays the respects to the dead that had just fallen. Although they were, well, not the best people, he didn't really know them, so he can't be one to judge. The only one he doesn't like is, well, the leader, and does not pay respect to him. After Tanjiro is done paying his respects, this is where Noelle would ask him what type of magic does he have, because at first she thought, well, his magic must be water, as the slices that he does look like water, and he called it the Breath of the Water. So what could it be other than that? Well, Tanjiro then says his magic isn't water, it's actually a bit more complicated. He has breath magic based off of his own techniques, that being the breath styles. She's a little confused by this, but he essentially says that because of the different techniques he has, he's able to use different elements depending on the different technique. Obviously, both Asta and Magna would be super impressed by this, and basically fanboy over how powerful their vice captain is. And then Noelle asks him another question. She says, does he think that she could also do a water style like him? And Tanjiro says he doesn't really know, as the training was mostly to focus her breathing and calm her down while giving her the confidence to control her magic. But since she does have the attribute of water, it should be possible, at least in his mind. So yeah. Alright, so this is going to be the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This is the second part. I took a while to do this because I was on vacation for a bit, so I didn't have time to record. And yeah, so I really like this series. It's one of my favorite ones as it is a crossover, and this one isn't a Asta like point of view all the time, as Tanjiro is essentially the main character while Asta is the main character of the actual series, so I had to include both point of views. So it's an interesting kind of take compared to my normal what ifs. This is a kind of a longer one, as I wanted to explain the relationship between him and Noelle, as I do think if he was in this series he would help her out, as she's the one struggling the most, and because they're both, you know, water kind of fighters, at least at the beginning, it makes the most sense to me, and I think it'd be better for her to learn it than Asta, although Asta might learn a few tricks here and there, but it is yet to be seen, as he has a large sword and Tanjiro doesn't really work with those type of weapons. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you do, please give it a like. And with that being said, we gotta give a shout out to the patrons over on Patreon. So if you haven't joined it, it only costs $1 and you get all my videos early, as well as get a drawing from me once a month, depending on what tier you are and depending if you win the raffle for that month. It is pretty likely, as there isn't too many right now, so yeah, and if you're at a higher tier you have a likely chance of getting it. So with that being said, let's actually shout them out. So like I said, only costs $1, link in the description. So in our gold tier we have Nippy Director, Kenny, Dwayne Fenn, and Lyko. So you could join them at patreon.com/ComicSansTheMan, or you could click the link in the description. So with that being said, this is going to be the video. Oh, one more thing. If you made it to the end of the video, please comment down CS so I know you support the channel. So with that being said, this is going to be the video. So yeah.